Doug, good morning to you. And before we talk about the actual tournament, we discussed this earlier in the show, which is the comments made by Scottie Scheffler, which went viral. What was your take on hearing Scottie really give what I thought was a very contemplative sort of soliloquy on how he feels about being number one in the world?
Yeah, Michael Chelsa, great to be with you guys. And yeah, we're going to set the alarm early for tomorrow morning. And I already did this morning just to get ready in anticipation of the start of the Open. But as for Scottie, listen, I love the guy. And I've been out here for several years walking inside the ropes. And I've seen some incredible things. And I've gotten to know his family. And I love it when a great athlete talks about faith and family. I was going to say it's rare, but it's becoming more commonplace as you watch great sporting events unfold. But at the same time, listen, he's number one in the world. He's achieved generational wealth. He has won more than anybody here in the last 4 years in professional golf. There are more championships now than ever before. Used to be just the four majors guys. Now we have the signature events, the playoffs, the Tour Championship, the Players Championship. So to the victor goes the spoils, and I hear him, and I love the guy. At the same time, I think it's easier to sit up there and talk about things like that when you are the best and you have all these victories. And some of these other guys who are fighting for their absolute professional lives. I was in Bermuda last year, guys, when Rafa Campos, this young man from Puerto Rico, he has no money in the bank. His baby is born days before Bermuda. He has no place to play in the world, and he wins Bermuda to change his life around. He breaks down, and that was important to him. Faith and family was important. Obviously, he prayed the night before he won in Bermuda, but he goes out and accomplishes this major life-altering victory, and so he's now, that was important to him, guys. So I don't know. I thought it was compelling. It was interesting to see the number one player in the world talk about things like that on the eve of a major championship, one that he wants to win, obviously. I just sometimes I think it's easier when you're on top. I think it's easier to talk about things like that, and I don't think that's a negative. I just and it was on his heart, so I guess we'll give him credit for that.
Right. It does feel authentic because, that's the only place that he can speak from. He can't speak from the place of, somebody else because he's just not living that life. So I do give credit for him to, speak openly. And it does feel like that is something that he actually lives each and every day. They're not hollow words. He does feel like a family man and somebody who puts that ahead of golf. But back to the Open. And we've talked about Scottie a bit, but let's talk about Rory, because obviously a lot of storylines culminating for Rory in this one as well, and not just the bad haircut. Is there a reason why people might like Rory to win the Open here?
Well, of course, and you go back to 2019 when it was at Portrush, and it was the first time that the Open had come to Ireland in quite some time, and he hits his first tee shot out of bounds and shoots a 79 in that opening round, ultimately would miss the cut, and said at the time that was the most nervous he'd ever been, basically with the country of Ireland wrapped around that first tee, and he was feeling the nerves. So now he's back with the Grand Slam under his belt, and obviously after a couple of weeks off where he refreshed and recharged the batteries and played really well last week, I think he comes in great form. There's no question about it. At the same time, just because he's from this part of the world, he doesn't play this golf course very much. In fact, he hasn't played Portrush since he came back this week, since before 2019. So I think he's in the same boat as most all the other guys, but at the same time, he's coming off a really good week. I just find I find it hard to bet on him, guys, because he did win the Masters. That's the one he desperately wanted. He talked openly this week. He wants this one too for obvious reasons. He wants to win in his home country before the home folks. I just think it's too much to ask a guy this day and age to win 2 of the 4 and to win the Masters to complete the career Grand Slam and then come right back and have a storybook win at Portrush. I just think that's a tall order. And again, the Open Championship, guys, is the one major championship. They're all hard to handicap. This is the most difficult because of the weather. And so we just have to see Does Rory get the good weather draw or the lousy weather draw? Because all these guys will face some sort of inclement weather as the tournament unfolds. Right now I'm looking at the weather app, 65 to 70% chance of rain every single day. That's just standard operating procedure in Ireland. So we'll have to see if Rory gets lucky or faces the brunt of the weather.
Doug, I love watching the Open Championship and links golf because it's just a different type of golf, as you know, because of the weather and the history there. So when you talk about Royal Portrush in particular, what makes this course so special?
Well, guys, this is and you'll hear this a lot. It is a links course personified. It's like all these courses in Ireland. There's not a tree anywhere. It was carved out of the natural terrain of the land. Unlike the United States, where we use bulldozers and dynamite, and we move heaven and earth literally to build these Taj Mahals of golf courses, these links courses were carved out of the land right there on the cliffs of Ireland overlooking the water, which is absolutely breathtaking. But with that natural terrain comes all sorts of humps and valleys and moguls and pot bunkers and just things you don't see in the United States. And it sets up, guys, when you'll see it on television, when you're on the tee and you look down at these natural holes that are carved out of the terrain, it's breathtaking. It's like, oh my goodness. We don't see this but once a year in major championship golf, or if you're lucky enough to take a golf trip with your friends. But it is unbelievable. It's like, let me catch my breath at how beautiful it is. But at the same time, it's beautiful, but it's treacherous. And there's all sorts of little hidden problems out there for golfers. And obviously you have to drive it well, because if you decide to go conservative, there's bunkers on the short side. If you decide to bomb it, like Bryson DeChambeau, there's obviously trouble on the long side, and that's gotten him into trouble. But if you can maneuver it off the tee, ultimately the man who's the best iron player will win on a link-style course. And in 2019, Shane Lowry, an Irishman who won the biggest win in his career, he led the field in 2019, greens hit in regulation by a wide margin. Nobody put the ball in play, and nobody put it up on the green better than Shane Lowry. And at the same time, let me just say this. As you'll see it on TV, Portrush, the greens are very small. They're very narrow, and they're funny in shape. You'll find a lot of little skinny greens with a lot of trouble on right and left. I'm talking about bunkers. So, again, if you're not a good iron player, if you're coming in with problems with the irons, like, man, I just can't quite dial it in, you're probably not going to make the cut at the Open Championship.
Yeah, and Shane Lowry's also one of those like auto bet guys that I feel like when people hear rain and inclement weather, they're like, oh, Shane Lowry, and that's who you bet on. I also read a headline that he's going to celebrate even harder if he wins this one, which now I want to bet on him to win it. But are there some other guys in the field that are maybe worth watching outside of Scottie and Rory and the favorites?
Well, yeah, and keep in mind, guys, too, in the modern age of major championship golf, about 85% of all winners now are either in their late 20s or early 30s. So it's kind of like handicapping the Kentucky Derby, those horses that are just a little bit older. It makes a difference, but in the case of golf, it's those guys who hit that window of opportunity. And a guy like Victor Hovland, for example, 28 years old, has been knocking on the door. One of the premier iron players in the world, hits more greens than anybody else. What we talked about a moment ago, is he on the verge of winning his first ever major championship? Could be. It's been a really good year, top 5 at the U.S. Open, a really good year as far as playing in the major championships. And Victor Hovland is a guy, guys, we haven't talked about the greens on the links courses. They're slower, much slower than what the players face in the United States. And when you're a really good, and you'll hear this a lot too, a really good ball striker, and that's exactly what Victor Hovland falls in that category, it helps these guys when the greens aren't so fast, because the ball sits on the greens instead of firm and fast greens bounding off the back like they might do at Augusta or they would do at Oakmont, right? So a guy like Victor Hovland has an advantage, elite iron player, loves a young guy who's 28 from Norway, doesn't seem to get bothered by bad weather. It's kind of what, he said, listen, when I grew up in Norway, it was snowing most of the year. So when I got to play, it was great to get out and play. So I think Victor Hovland is a guy, and his numbers went down at the beginning of the week. He was like plus 3,000, and now he's plus 2,500. So I kind of like that theory. And then if you're looking for a long shot, and this is really a long shot, Maverick McNeely, a guy who's 28 years old. I love these 28-year-old guys, right? Since he missed the cut last year at the Open, guys, he has 12 top 20 finishes on the PGA Tour, including a win. And Maverick McNeely, a guy who's made the cut in all the majors, hasn't played, a 32nd place finish, 33rd, 37th U.S. Open. I mean, when you make the cut at the majors, that's a good deal. But he's a guy with experience, and he fits in all those categories we just talked about. Great iron player. So, and right before I came on, he was plus 12,500. So Maverick is maybe a long shot pick. And then, Chelsa, you mentioned Scottie Scheffler. Again, last week at the Scottish Open, number one strokes gained overall. If you add up all the categories, he was the number one guy, except for putting. And he doesn't like putting on these greens over in Scotland and Ireland because they're slow. They're bumpy. They're not what he is used to growing up in the United States. And while he is the number one player by a wide margin, if you look at his statistics, I mean, there's a big gap between him and number two, Rory. He's the best, but he doesn't like putting on these greens. And even though he's going to win one of these days, I just don't see Scottie. He was frustrated last week at the Scottish Open, even though he top 10. And I think he's going to struggle this week on these greens at Portrush. But let me emphasize again, he tees off early on Thursday morning. We'll have to see if he gets the bad draw or the good draw. Unlike all the other majors, they don't blow the horn unless lightning's in the area. These guys will play in some, winds 30 to 40 miles an hour, and the rain will be coming sideways. And they don't blow the horn in that case in the Open. So sometimes you have to deal with the elements in a big way at the Open that you don't at the other major championships.